Ivy and Gecko acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and future. Welcome to Hearts and Minds. Our podcast episodes feature conversations with highly accomplished mining executives and board directors. We'll explore critical themes relating to leadership impact, staff engagement and culture development. So tune in, enjoy the conversations and prepare to be inspired. I'm Alana Bray-White, the Managing Director of Ivy and Gecko, and this is our podcast, Hearts and Minds.
Yeah, one of the things, and there's a lot in the press at the moment, that we've been strong about is values are a non-negotiable. I think I learned that from Macquarie. There are boundaries that are defined by our values, and you step out of that, and there is no place for anyone in the company that steps out of that. I think there is a real need to ensure that we're able to attract the best and brightest. I think that's a real risk for Australia. It appalls me that there are fewer places at universities for geosciences, geologists, mining engineers today than there was a decade ago. I think that's a canary in a birdcage moment.
Our guest today is Jake Klein. Jake is a founding director and the executive chairman of Evolution Mining, a leading ASX gold and copper producer with a market capitalisation of around $10 billion. The company has grown to employ over 3,000 people and has 6 operating assets in Tier 1 jurisdictions across Australia and Canada. Previously, Jake served as the executive chairman of Conquest Mining, and prior to this, he was the president and CEO of Sino Gold Mining, where he managed the development of that company into the largest foreign participant in the Chinese gold industry. Earlier in his career, Jake worked for both Macquarie Bank and PwC. We're really pleased to have Jake in our studio today. As one of the mining industry's most respected strategists and deal makers, he has led the transformation of Evolution Mining from a humble startup just 13 years ago to a globally relevant player in gold and copper production. Over the years, Ivy and Gecko has consulted to Evolution's board and ELT, and Jake's influence on the company's reputation has been unmistakable. It is no coincidence that in 2023, Evolution was ranked as Australia's mid-tier employer of choice by a large sample of mining executives. In this episode, Jake explains why owning and operating high-quality, long-life assets in Tier 1 jurisdictions is not enough. He shares insights from his leadership journey and reveals his hopes and concerns for the Australian mining industry. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Jake Klein.
Jake, good to see you. Thanks for dropping by the studio.
Thanks, David. Good to be here.
I know you've had a hectic week of commitments, including presenting at the WA Mining Club just a couple of hours ago.
Yeah, well, I'm in the heart of mining in Australia, so good to see everyone here and the number of people who participated in that lunch.
It was a great presentation, and boy, did you pull a big audience. I reckon that's one of the biggest I've ever seen. Tell me, walking around Optus Stadium, arguably Australia's finest sporting stadium, did you feel an urge to take out a West Coast Eagles membership while you're here?
No, I'm ex-South African and I'm still struggling to understand AFL.
Right.
I have a number of mentors and coaches who are helping me in that regard, but I have never felt compelled to do that.
We had one of our guests and clients, John Wellborn, the former Wallaby, who I'm sure you know, in the studio a few weeks ago. But yeah, what a terrific stadium it is.
It is. It's an amazing stadium.
On this podcast, Jake, we invite mining leaders at the executive and the board level to share some of their experiences and insights in regards to their style of leadership. And we talk about the impact leadership has on stakeholder engagement and the development of culture within mining businesses. And the hope is, of course, that along the way our listeners may learn something of value and apply it for their own development. Before I ask you to step back and tell us a little bit about your earlier years and your heritage, you must be very pleased with the continuing momentum of Evolution in terms of generating such high margin cash flow. I was reading the quarterly report a couple of days ago, and you've got some really pleasing results there.
We have. The company's in great shape, and I think when we started it in 2011, it has exceeded our expectations, but I'm the sort of individual that says, okay, we've achieved this now, what next? So I think it's great. I think we've got to keep our feet firmly on the ground because a lot of the momentum at the moment is high copper and gold prices. Yes, we're doing a great job operationally in the last couple of quarters, but humble and feet on the ground.
Yeah, and good to see Red Lake, your Canadian operation, producing, I believe, a record quarterly cash flow under Evolution's ownership.
It is. That's been a journey. We wear lots of bruises and scars from that. But yes, it is great to see Red Lake finally delivering on some of its commitments.
When I read about your all-in sustaining costs of just over $15,000 an ounce,
$1,500,
$1,500, of course, that is remarkable. I mean, that is akin to some of the African producers that we read about, but for an Australian producer at that low cost, it's quite something.
It is, and part of our low cost is that we have a copper credit. About 30% of our revenue now comes from copper. So yes, we want to position ourselves in that lowest quartile, and one of the benefits of having a copper byproduct is that it does reduce those costs.
Yeah. So 13 years on into the journey, what will Evolution look like 13 years from now, do you think? You've currently got 6 great assets. You're looking for another 2 according to the brochure. Where do you think you'll be sort of 13 years on from now?
I think the strategy's always been fairly simple and straightforward. We're not aspiring to a production target or a scale. What we always want to do is be improving the quality of our asset portfolio. We want to always do things that are accretive to shareholders. So in a cyclical industry, that means trying to be counter-cyclical.
Yes.
So when others are buying, maybe you should be selling. And when others are selling, maybe you should be buying. So right at the moment, it's probably not a market to be buying, in my view. So we need to be patient. I'm not convinced that the gold industry and gold companies are scalable. I think there is a really important part of culture that is difficult to sustain as you get bigger and you get multi-jurisdictional. So we've said Australia and Canada, improving the quality of the portfolio. Frankly, having fewer better assets is better than having lots of small assets.
Yeah, it's an important, an interesting point about as the size of the company increases, both in terms of headcount and number of assets in multiple jurisdictions, you do see bureaucracy and hierarchy creeping into the culture of businesses. And in our executive search business, we're often targeting individuals from the big majors, the big global companies, to join some of the leading mid-tiers, and it's very often, certainly in the case of Evolution, it's not a hard sell. They feel more empowered in a smaller business and able to make a bigger impact.
That's good to hear, and it's something that we're really striving to achieve. I mean, I think, I always look at other companies, the bigger companies, and there seems to be this tipping point where your kind of systems start to overwhelm the company. And people feel like they're part of the system, not an individual. Recognizing that, we've had a challenging couple of years as a company because we've bought more complicated assets, but we probably didn't upgrade our management capacity to the level that was capable of managing those assets successfully. So we've had a tough couple of years operationally, but we've changed that. But can a mining company do the 2 things which I think are really fundamental to a company, and they're quite different. Can you operate efficiently and successfully and safely? And that requires a high level of predictability, a high level of repetitiveness, a low tolerance for error. And then can you grow, which almost requires the opposite skills, which is low level of repetitiveness, high level of ambiguity, and a need to kind of jump off the edge of the ledge when you get close. And I find it's really difficult to maintain those 2 conversations. But if you look at really successful companies, not only in the mining industry, they're able to innovate successfully and grow and deliver fantastic product.
It's a delicate balancing act, isn't it? Getting the formula right. The accent gives it away, Jake. Tell us a little bit about your heritage, your family background and early years.
So I grew up in South Africa. My grandparents fled Europe from World War II, really, as Jews leaving Lithuania and Poland. We grew up in South Africa, Cape Town. I'm from, and I guess had a terrific upbringing, noting that it had structural issues, South Africa, and my parents always were against apartheid, and we were I have 3 siblings, 4 kids in the family. We were always kind of almost of the view that our future was unlikely to be in South Africa unless the system could change, which it did, but we left before that. So my brother is an engineer, an investment banker, and he left for the US when he'd finished university. My older sister left for Australia and came here. I went to Johannesburg to do my articles as an accountant. You could defer your army service for 3 years, which I never did want to do or complete. So I deferred for 3 years. And I met my wife, who we went backpacking afterwards. She had brothers in London. We went to go stay at my brother in New York. We ran out of money and stayed at my sister in Sydney over here, and didn't finish our round-the-world trip. And Sydney and Australia has been my home since then, and we've been joined by my younger sister, and my wife and I have had 2 kids, which we love dearly, and they've decided to go and live in London.
Wow, great story. So what age were you when you settled in Australia, and what year was that?
So I was 25 in 1991, and for those of your listeners who are old enough, that was the last time Australia had a recession.
I remember it well, the one we had to have, if I remember correctly.
And David, I'm pretty proud that I've only been for one job interview in Australia, and that was at Macquarie Bank, and I'd never heard of Macquarie Bank. I wanted to be a banker, and I managed to get into internal audit there. I never wanted to be an internal auditor, but Macquarie, little did I know, was probably on the road to becoming one of the most successful stories in Australian corporate history.
Yes.
And got into that, and they really encouraged you to just kind of go around, understand the business a bit better. And then someone in the bullion division said, well, why don't you come work for us? Our systems don't seem very good. And they were the most profitable division in the bank at the time.
Wow.
Selling gold hedges at interest rates when interest rates were 15% was pretty easy. And they were growing that business. And then by chance, someone said to me, we've got a visitor coming from China. You know where the other divisions in the bank because of your internal audit background. Why don't you take them around? And one thing led to another, and we became miners in China.
So was that your sliding door moment? It sounds as though that was your introduction to gold and China as a destination that to do some business.
Yeah, Nick Curtis and I, Nick has been a fabulous entrepreneur and mentor of mine. He met someone who came from China, who was working for the government of China at the time. They wanted to know about the financial system. In his words, China had the hardware, but it needed the software. At that time, they were thinking about financial software.
Yes.
And he then invited us to China, and one thing led to another. And 15 years later, we'd built gold mines in remote parts of China.
Fantastic story. And you relayed some experiences a couple of hours ago at the mining club that when you first went to China, was that 87?
That was 93 and 94.
93, okay. Very different place then to what it is now.
Oh, completely. I mean, there were people on bicycles. There were, people using an abacus, and I thought I was smart using my laptop, a very old laptop at the time. But it was just a completely different place. We went to Jiangxi Copper at the time in 1994. Jiangxi Copper had a smelter of 100,000 tons. 50,000 tons was a Russian smelter, and 50,000 tons was the first Sumitomo flash furnace that it had installed in China. Jiangxi Copper today is the world's largest copper smelter.
Wow.
With about 1 million tons of material a year.
Yeah, gee whiz. That's huge scale, isn't it?
Amazing.
Jake, when you're not concentrating on your work, those few hours when you don't have to think about business, how do you relax?
I don't relax that much, but exercise has been a real stress reliever for me.
You're a keen runner, aren't you?
I've been a keen runner. I realise that time doesn't doesn't help you get any faster. In fact, it makes you slower all the time. So I still kind of want to exercise an hour a day at least. I've started Pilates, which is really good and helping strength. But exercise has probably been the big stress reliever.
I remember last time we met at the Diggers and Dealers, you mentioned you'd just gone for a run around the streets of Kalgoorlie a couple of hours before you had to make the presentation. So I thought, gee, this guy's keen. Let's talk about leadership behaviour. Jake, I'm really interested for you to reveal to us some of your advice in terms of how to become a more effective leader. Before we do that, many people would argue leaders are born. I tend to disagree. I think that leadership is a set of learned skills and behaviours that many people can acquire to some extent over time. What's your point of view?
So I think I've learned a lot of skills, and so you need to surround yourself with people you can learn from.
Yes.
And I've been incredibly fortunate. As I said, Nick Curtis was one of my early mentors, this really courageous guy who thought we could build mines in China.
Yes.
That required a leap of faith that very few people were able to jump. And I think my father said, when I said, I'm thinking of leaving Macquarie Bank, my late father, he said, well, what have you got to lose? So you may as well just do it. So Jim Askew is another person who's been incredibly supportive and guiding in my career. You need people like that when you're having really difficult moments. And the one thing about the mining industry is that it will give you difficult moments if you're in a leadership position. I've described it as often as an industry of moments of pleasure interspersed by periods of pain. And you need people like Jim to go, I've seen this before, let's just get to the facts. We had an experience which I think to me was a sliding door moment with respect to leadership. There was this, in 2005, there was Sichuan earthquakes which had tragic impact on people in China. But we were really worried about the tailings dam at our facility, which was not in that province, but it was in Shaanxi province. And someone rang and said, well, it may have failed. We weren't operators of that site anymore. But that was probably the worst call I've ever had in my career, and rang Jim, and he said, well, let's just find out the facts and let's just try and settle down and understand what's happened. And it turned out that the tailings dam hadn't failed. There was no issue. But it's moments like that when you want people around you to guide you properly. So it is probably a learned behavior, but getting into the area and surrounding yourself or having people who give you opportunity is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've mentioned the word courage a couple of times, and I reckon courage and imagination are two qualities of leadership that are absolutely critical. Without imagination to visualise where you might go in the future, you don't have ideas, bold new ideas, and also without the courage then to execute that imaginative thinking, you can't progress either. And that's a segue into talking a little bit about your Mount Rawdon plan. You mentioned it at the mining club, and I've read about it. So your plan, I understand, is at the end of its operating life to convert the Mount Rawdon gold mine into a significant renewable energy asset. Tell us a little bit about that, because I've not heard of a mining company doing this.
So I think it's another case of just being open to ideas. So we were approached about 4 years ago by ICA Partners. They are genuine renewable experts. They're ex-Goldman Sachs bankers and UBS. They've set up a consultancy business and banking business. And they'd done a countrywide search of properties and sites that may be suitable for pumped hydro, because in their view, solar and wind are commodities and they're able to be put up relatively cheaply. So the key strategic part of the transition is the storage.
Yes.
And that's what we're finding out now.
Yes.
So they said there are attributes that they think suit Mount Rawdon being converted to a pumped hydro project. The one is topography, so it's and that's related to head height
Yes.
as to the amount, the power which it can generate, where the upper and lower reservoir distance is. The other is closeness to transmission lines. There's only 27 kilometres of distance between Mount Rawdon and the transmission line, and the other is obviously in an area like. It's in the Bundaberg area, a need for energy generation. So they said out of all their searches across Australia, Mount Rawdon suited conversion to pumped hydro. Wow. At that time, I honestly thought, wow, this is an interesting idea to close a mine. That sounds interesting. We'll do well to close the mine and have done it in a way that hasn't been done before. But as I've got involved in it more and understood the transition and the scale that is of investment that's required, I've started to think, wow, this is different. This is really quite significant. It ultimately could generate power for 2 million homes.
Yeah.
And Australia is struggling to find projects that are going to be able to deliver into its targets. So I've got more and more intrigued by it, but it's one of those things of seeing an idea, being open to it, and hopefully making a contribution to its success.
And I'm sure as you go through this process with Mount Rawdon, there will be learnings for other mining companies who have assets nearing the end of their operating lives, to providing the topography and the geography is appropriate.
There will be.
Yeah, great move. You've been a company director for many years. Are there any key lessons you've learned about leadership at the board level as opposed to leadership at the executive level? How do they manifest differently at those two levels?
So I've been fortunate. I've been the founding director and on two companies, Sino Gold and Evolution, and I've had the opportunity to select boards and have boards that are genuinely committed to the company's success.
Yeah.
So they've never been companies where it's been, I suppose, a company that has been sought after to be a director of because it gets you into another stratosphere with respect to being a director. Yeah. They've been people who've wanted to grow the company right from the start. So there has been a level of commitment and engagement from board members that I think is unique. So when something happens or goes wrong in a company, and again, there are always going to be things that go wrong, does the board immediately think, the board member think, what's this going to do to my reputation? Yeah. Or what can I do to support the company to get through this? And it's the latter that we've been fortunate to have board members do.
Yeah. Interesting. You've got a board of 9 people, I believe, 6 male, 3 female. Clearly a bunch of intelligent people, and presumably, they've got firm convictions about a range of matters. As a chairman, tell us a little bit more about how you manage that board dynamic. How do you encourage the best from everybody so their contribution to the team is optimised?
I think, and you'd need to check this with our board, but I think having open, honest conversations, disagreement is good. I don't think board meetings need to be always agreeing. Actually expressing alternate or different opinions is good. Yeah. And then having an honest conversation about what is in the best interests of the company. One of the things, and there's a lot in the press at the moment that we've been strong about is values are a non-negotiable.
Yes.
So I think I learned that from Macquarie.
Yep.
There are boundaries that are defined by our values, and you step out of that, and there is no place for anyone in the company that steps out of that.
Yeah.
But beyond that, really, anything should be open for discussion.
Yeah. And do you allow or encourage your fellow directors to have direct contact with the executive team, or are you the conduit?
No, we're very strong on saying that anyone has access to anyone. There are no secrets. Once you get to that point, I think you've got a troubled company.
Yeah.
So there are issues that need to be dealt with, but there should never be any management of data or access to people.
And now we take a short break to acknowledge our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Halo Civil Engineering. Halo is a multidiscipline civil contractor that specialises in the delivery of complex civil projects across defence, infrastructure, energy and resources. A West Australian company committed to delivering dynamic solutions with a focus on zero harm, while having a positive impact on their industry, clients and the people they serve. For more information, search for Halo Civil Engineering on socials or visit halocivil.com. If you'd like to inquire about sponsoring an episode of Hearts and Minds, please reach out to us on LinkedIn or via email info@ivyandgecko.com.au. Ivy & Gecko is a leading Australian talent and organisational consulting firm. We specialise in providing executive search and board consulting services to ASX small and mid-tier explorers, developers and producers in the gold and critical minerals industries. As the only executive search and leadership consulting firm to be admitted membership of the Minerals Council of Australia, Ivy & Gecko is uniquely resourced to advocate for the interests of our exploration, project development and mining clients.
It's interesting, Jake. As you know, about 12 months ago, Ivy & Gecko conducted some research in the mid-tier mining sector, project developers and producers, gold and other critical minerals. And part of the research was that we surveyed, I think it was 309 key management and executive level people. We asked them a load of questions. One of those questions was amongst the mid-tier developers and miners, which are the employers of choice in your opinion, based on your understanding of their reputation? And we dedicated a chapter in our book, Smart Value. Evolution came out as the number one ranked mid-tier company for a variety of reasons. I think there was over 20 different criteria that people were asked to rank the companies on. Now, values-based culture was certainly up there as one of the main reasons why so many people were attracted to the reputation of your company. That doesn't happen by accident. I had deep discussions with Paul Eagle, your head of people and culture, about it, and Laurie Conway to try and lift the lid on what your company was doing that was so appealing. And it's all reported in the book. But congratulations, first of all, on that. It's very significant and just underlines the fact that, you know, despite the quality of your assets and the quality of the jurisdictions they're in and the health of your balance sheet, people go to work for companies where they feel a sense of belonging and empowerment and can really add value. So that came through that.
I think that's really, really important. You know, I think you're saying, are leaders born or are they created? I think no one should be under any illusion that they have a preordained right to lead. It's a privilege, and people need to treat it as a privilege. I've been unbelievably fortunate that the sliding door moments in my career happen to generally be successful. And I think, you know, every person in the company wants to be respected and treated with decency as you'd expect to be treated. So I hope that that's something that we have in Evolution. We haven't had always success of that nature, and we've made some mistakes. But fundamentally, I'd expect any person to be able to come and engage with myself or anyone on the board, executive team, or anywhere, and have an honest, engaging conversation with us.
Terrific. As a chair, what are the three most informing questions to ask of a CEO candidate? So, in other words, what are the most important personal qualities you expect them to bring to the table?
David, aren't you the recruitment's expert?
I'm the one asking the questions today.
I think it's the culture piece, the values piece, And then are you going to be able to really live the values, inspire people, and stay on the journey?
Yeah.
Because I think in listed companies today, particularly resource companies that are reporting on a quarterly basis, there's a bias towards thinking short term when you really are trying to create long-term value and culture over the long term.
Yeah.
Are you really going to be able to make the very difficult decisions on people changes?
Yeah.
Have those honest conversations about performance? I think those are the most challenging things to do, and you're not surrounding yourself by people who just agree with you,
Yes.
but creating a team and a culture or a board
Yeah.
that actually has some disagreements.
One of the things I look for, yes, I'm a recruiter, but when I've got a C-suite level candidate in front of me, is trying to assess what I refer to as their learning agility. In other words, some people just simply know what to do when they don't know what to do. Other people are really almost panic-stricken by ambiguity and uncertainty around them. Now that's a rare quality. It is a competitive edge quality in a C-suite leader. But being able to keep your head, remain rational, look at the facts, weigh up the different options for solution paths, and then choose an appropriate one is one of the key things.
I think you're right, and the other build on that, I'd say, is to know when to ask. So,
Yes.
there are people around you who you can consult, you can engage, and as I said, someone like Jim has been someone I'd pick up the phone to, any time to discuss anything, even if he wasn't on the board.
Yeah.
Tommy McKeith, Peter Smith. We've got a whole board full of very talented people: Vicky Binns, Andrew Hall, and Fiona Hicks. So I've now gone through the whole board.
Yeah.
I think. And I think it's having those uncomfortable conversations as well. Generally, probably the thing that I've learned most is that you can't analyze things forever. You also do need to take action, and sometimes that action is the most difficult thing to do. So, I think it's a case of getting that balance right. Yeah.
Some of the guests we've had on the show, Jake, have talked about how they've managed toxic cultures. In your experience, you may not have had to turn around such a culture, but what are some of the red flags or the derailers that where your antenna goes up and say, look, we may have a cultural systemic problem here?
I think when people overlook things which are clearly outside of your values, we've in the mining industry, you've seen lots of that, frankly, in kind of harassment and bullying.
Yeah.
People need to call that out immediately, and need to have the courage to do that, and the authority and the platform to do it, and they need to be listened to.
Yes.
Because the bias is to go, it's an isolated event, but it actually may be systemic in the organisation.
Yeah.
So I think to treat those sort of things seriously. I'd say that's probably the biggest one.
Should a company's reward system reflect compliance with or support for the company values? And if it should, how should it go about doing it?
I think yes, but I think it's a ticket to the reward system. That's a non-negotiable. It's expected of everyone. So I'm not sure you should be rewarded for staying within the values and living the values. I think you shouldn't be working at the company if you're not living the values.
It's a minimum requirement, or it's required to participate in the game. Yeah. What are the talking about some of the industry challenges and opportunities? What do you think are amongst the biggest challenges today facing the Australian mining industry?
I think it's attracting and retaining talents. I think there is a real need to ensure that we're able to attract the best and brightest. I think that's a real risk for Australia. It appalls me that there are fewer places at universities for geosciences, geologists, mining engineers today than there was a decade ago.
Yeah.
I think that's a canary in a birdcage moment. Because it's really reflecting maybe some of the sentiment towards mining. That our universities aren't growing their mining faculties, but shrinking them.
Yeah, indeed they are. And you're dead right. If you look at the stats, the tertiary institutions are certainly pumping out fewer mining professionals. There's been some well-publicised errors of judgment by bigger and medium-sized companies in terms of violating environmental or heritage standards. That's, in my view, created quite a bit of tension in the community, and a lot of younger people may say, look, it's a dirty industry in many ways, and I'd rather apply my talents in a different sector. How should we better educate people in the critical importance of mining and get these talented people into it?
So I don't think we can become defensive because the issues you're talking about, the environmental damages that have been caused, are real. So we need to front up to that and respond to it. And I think the companies that have tried to do that are doing well in regards to that.
Yeah.
But we also need to recognise that message isn't being heard across Australia.
Yeah.
And the sentiment towards mining, whether it's because it's perceived to be a dirty industry, whether it's perceived to be a carbon-emitting industry, has given it a negative perception.
Yes.
So we need to do more, and we need to figure out how to do more and how to really recognise that getting that message across is critical to our future. We only employ 2% of the workforce, but we contribute 13% of the GDP of Australia. Mining has made a disproportionate impact on the wealth of Australia.
Yes.
So maybe we need to ask younger people to look at their phone
Yes.
and tell them that none of that would be possible without mining.
Yeah.
But we're not doing a good enough job because there is a deterioration in the recognition of mining.
Another thing I don't think we do particularly well as a country is the regulation associated with approval processes. We've all heard so much about the recent McPhillamys fiasco, I guess is one term to call it. The Minerals Council of Australia is a strong advocate for a single front door concierge service that might help investors navigate the government agencies at state and federal levels. Would this be a sensible way to help reduce the duplication and the inconsistency of approvals processes?
I think it would. The only caveat I'd say is that once you have an approval in Australia, it is solid and it's probably amongst the best in the world. So yes, the approval process is complicated, but there is a process, and the McPhillamys issue, I hope, is a one-off. But we do need to address it because it is a setback, and those sort of issues need to be flagged way, way sooner than right at the end of the process.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of time and a lot of money was invested getting to the point where it was at.
Huge. And there was a long public consultation process, which the New South Wales government took very seriously, but obviously wasn't sufficient standard or perceived to be sufficient standard to the federal government. That has to stop.
It certainly doesn't send a good signal to the investor market, does it?
It's terrible.
Jake, as you well know, we've seen a lot of consolidation in the gold industry, particularly in recent years, as companies seek to build their value through M&A. It seems to me, as a consultant looking into the industry, that often the potential synergies of companies or assets coming together is not fully realised. Boards and executive teams tend to focus, rightly so, on the physical assets of the mines, the process plants, the infrastructure, perhaps focus less on the less tangible aspects of people and processes integration. Now, you've had a recent acquisition, of course, with North Parks. Tell us a little bit about your experience with M&A and assimilating and integrating the less tangible aspects of the operations.
So we've been fortunate because we've generally bought assets from majors, and those assets have been somewhat unloved because they haven't been of strategic importance, and hence the major has come to a decision to sell those assets. So generally, we've found that people have been excited to join a growing company, which, if you take an asset like Cow, in New South Wales, which Barrick sold. It was the last asset that Barrick sold in Australia. So they'd been running this process that they decided that Australia wasn't strategically important to them, so they started selling assets. So the people at Cal knew that they were going to end up in another owner. They didn't have any money spent on exploration for a long time, and they were kind of just in this zone where they really didn't know what their future was. So when we took it over and we said, you know what, you're actually our most important asset. That was at the time in 2015. We want to spend money on exploration. We want to understand this asset. There was a great level of enthusiasm, and it's been great. Similarly, Ernest Henry was sold when Glencore were in some real trouble with respect to debt, and people were feeling the stress over there, and we were kind of, okay, well, we're here to, it's a really important asset for us. The same with North Parks, where CMOC, Chinese company, I think knew they'd held that asset for a decade, but I think they knew that they just, because of FIRB regulations, the relationship with China, that they couldn't expand their footprint in Australia and buy more assets. So they've been very focused on the Congo. So people in Australia were kind of in this zone of we're not that important to our the future of our owner.
Yes.
So hang on, we're joining Evolution. This is really good. We're going to be an important part of their future. So that's been an important part of our process. But yeah, integrating cultures is important. You can't have different cultures. So you have to decide which is the culture that is going to win out and make that the culture on the side.
Yeah, I mean, some people would argue that you can have subcultures thriving within a business, but I think as long as there is a common set of values that is the basis of the cultures.
I think that's very well said, David.
Yeah.
I have no issue with, at Ernest Henry, people still wear an Ernest Henry logo with an Evolution logo. That's physical.
Yeah.
But as long as they're living the values of Evolution, no problem.
Yeah. Your turn, Jake. Have you got a question for me before we head into the rapid fire questions?
No, I think you've covered a lot of ground. Other than, I suppose, the key question is, how are we going to attract young and talented people to see resources as, even from a technology perspective? I think, the technology is going to be a major part of mining's future. But if you think about young people thinking about technology, they're not thinking about mining as the platform they want to solve.
Yeah, correct. Look, it's a really good question and a very pertinent one. I think it's all about education and it's all about marketing and salesmanship. You've got to get inside the heads of these young people and say, what's important to them? What do they value? And curate a value proposition that addresses the things that are important to them. It's interesting, Jake, when I interview people, typically because of the level of seniority we recruit at, we don't see many people in their 20s and 30s. But, I look at very senior people in their 30s and 40s and, increasingly they're interrogating me as the interviewer representing a client on the green credentials, for example, of their prospective employer. 15 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have been put on the spot, so to speak. So these days, recruiters, internal or external to a company, need to have done their research, do their homework, and be able to furnish evidence of the actual progress towards decarbonisation, just as one example. So it's all about education. You mentioned at the club presentation today that, there should be more school visits to mine sites to allow people in their formative years of education to grasp and understand what actually happens on a mine site, get them excited. If people become engaged, they start to apply discretionary effort to what they're doing. And when you get a critical mass of people doing that, great things can happen. It's a hard ask and a long-term process, but we've got to work at doing that.
Agreed.
Okay, some rapid fire questions for you here, Jake. When you think about people who've shown great leadership, you've already mentioned a few, whether it be business, sport or the creative arts, who do you most admire and why?
Richie McCaw, the All Black captain, calmness under pressure, leadership and trust in their teammates.
He wrote a book in the last few years, didn't he? Yeah, I haven't read it. Have you?
I have read it, It's good.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. I've heard a lot about him and, I'm not a rugby follower, but boy, what a track record that team had under his leadership. What's the best career or business advice you've been offered and who gave it to you?
I think someone at Macquarie gave it to me, but the fact that opportunities don't come gift wrapped in terms of career opportunities, so go out and find them. and try and seize them.
Yes.
Because if someone's waiting at their desk, waiting for their manager to come along and say, here's what we want you to do, you're going to be waiting a long time.
Yeah, good advice. What's the non-fiction book that is you found most valuable?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Probably Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Okay. That's an oldie, isn't it?
It's an oldie. He survived the camps during World War II, and then he wrote a book. It's a very short book, and I'd recommend it, about just people needing a purpose to live. And I think that's important in a company as well,
Sure
in a different way. What is a company's purpose? Because everyone just comes around to the business every day and doesn't understand the business's purpose. You're not going to have a very good one.
And making a profit is not good enough.
Making a profit isn't.
That's a byproduct of the real reason you're here.
Absolutely.
What's your favourite productivity hack, Jake? What's the one thing you do at the start of every day that helps you get the most out of your day?
That's also an interesting one, because people would say I'm a bit random. Be open to ideas, like follow your gut. I'm not rigid. So if someone walks past you and wants to have a chat, deconstruct your day to have that conversation.
Not easy to do some of the time with a schedule like you've got, but
it's actually easier than you think. I think anyone who tells you they're too busy to talk to people is not doing the right thing.
I reckon so many executives are too busy, Jake, as opposed to productive. I think, the art of engaging with people is all about spending time to care, genuinely, hopefully, care about them and helping them to realise more of their potential. If people walked at a slightly slower pace, had fewer things on their to-do list, they might feel a little bit more relaxed and able to spend time with people.
I think just to build on that and to add one, the thing which we've struggled with the most at Evolution, and I'd say it's right on the priority list, is to figure out the things you can stop doing. Because as companies evolve and as they get bigger, you keep doing the stuff and everyone needs more people and more things to keep doing those things. But no one actually ever stops and says, well, what are we doing that we don't actually need to do? And I think you'd be surprised at how many things could be stopped.
Yeah. I like to open up my business conferences with 3 questions. What should we stop doing? What should we start doing? And what should we continue doing?
And people have real difficulty saying what they should stop doing.
Yeah. What have you changed your mind about recently?
Everything.
Pick one.
The decarbonisation process. Yes, it's right in theory. Yes, we should do it, but how we should do it, the degree of difficulty and cost of getting to a decarbonised world, which we need to get to, needs to be really thought through, and people need to recognise the journey.
Yes. It's a slower journey, it seems, than what people may have anticipated several years ago. In many ways, you can see that. People are beginning to be a little bit more pragmatic about, yes, it's a great ideal to aspire to, but how are we going to get there? And it's going to take a bit longer.
I think that's right. And I think the reality is the last 20% is going to be the most difficult. The first 80% is easier, and that's proving to be difficult because we're nowhere near 80%. So the last 20% is really difficult. The other thing that I think we're underestimating completely is the degree of difficulty in getting the poles and wires out there in a distributed system, which needs thousands and thousands of kilometres of new poles and wires put through communities and country areas where farmers and landowners really need to be consulted. And we're not giving ourselves the time to engage and consult properly without it just either being forced on them or being objected to.
Yeah. Do you have a view on small modular nuclear reactors getting into the energy mix here?
I don't, because I'm not an expert on power, and most people who are commentating on it are not experts in power. So I think what we should be doing is relying on experts, think tanks, develop a white paper that everyone goes, okay, this is the right pathway, and put everything on the table, because we've made it into a political issue rather than a nation-building issue.
It's become a political football, hasn't it? Very ideological between the two major parties.
It has.
What activity bores you the most, Jake?
Meetings.
What activity excites you the most?
Meetings which are really interesting and thought-provoking and go off tangents and are really interesting.
Yeah. Final question. If you walked out of this studio and the year was 2054, 30 years from now, what do you think would strike you as the most significant difference in the way people led their lives?
That I was alive.
I'll be alive.
I think technology is going to change the way things are done. The mining industry still has a lot of catch up to do with regard to technology. I think in 30 years' time, there is just phenomenal opportunity for technology to change how we mine products.
Looking through your crystal ball, how will AI apply to the mining industry 30 years from now?
I think it will have changed completely. It always surprises me as a person who's come from a commercial background to mining. We spend an awful lot of time and money bolting and meshing areas so that we could put people under them so we can blow it up again to advance another 5 meters. If you can remove people from those sort of dangerous activities, you think about geological core logging, and you think about scanning that and then comparing it against every other deposit, maybe we'd have a much better understanding of the geology and the opportunity before we make the investment on the above ground infrastructure.
Interesting thoughts. Jake, you've been very generous with your time. I know it's been a really busy week for you here in Perth. Thanks for dropping by the studio. We appreciate it. Congratulations on the great work you and your team are doing at Evolution. And we look forward to perhaps having this conversation a few years from now with you.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, Jake.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to Hearts and Minds. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a rating or share it with a friend. And don't forget to follow us and connect on social media for updates on all of our upcoming guests. I'm Alana Bray-White, and I look forward to you joining us for our next episode.